Hello and welcome to medicsvoices.com. I'm Donald McCauley, and today I'm talking to one of the leaders, the thought leaders of American family practice. John, it's good to talk to you. Now, John, there's something I'm really interested in, and that's in your career, you spent time with one of the doyens of family medicine, Julian Tudor Hart. Tell us how that influenced your career.
It happened because I was a junior faculty member in the first stage of my career, and a colleague of mine slipped me a journal article. We used to rip them out and put our names on it and send it around. And so he stuck something in my box and said, "You might be interested in this." It was an article that Julian wrote in Lancet about titled, unlike Julian, it's titled kind of a dull title of the relationship of primary care to undergraduate education, and it was one of the few things I've ever seen that he's written about the responsibilities of general practice education, because he has always been a teacher in many, many ways, but never an academic in the sense that it's a traditional, academic role. So this article was just the most, how he could write. It was the most extraordinary piece of writing I've ever read, and it talked about the duties of general practice education, and it touched on everything that I wanted to think I was going to do as a teacher. And I said, "Who is this person?" And his address was, Glencorrog near Port Talbot in South Wales. And I thought, you described your town as near another town? So I had no idea who he was. I didn't know anything he had written. And then I started, going to the library and looking around, and long story, but I needed a break in my life. I had been going kind of flat out since I was in kindergarten, and I wanted to take a sabbatical. So I wrote him and said, could you use somebody? Could I come look at your health center? Could I come see what's going on in general practice in UK? And he wrote back and said, "You're welcome to be here. I can make arrangements for you to visit other places," which he did. And so, I took my 8-year-old son and my wife, and we went over and lived in council housing in Glencorrog and spent 9 months. And I was the first American residency trained GP to get licensed in National Health Service. I didn't get paid. I did this all on my own nickel, but basically I was seeing patients, for me, it felt more important to be part of the experience of general practice rather than be a visitor and look at it, from afar. So it was a remarkable experience. And the way it changed my life, of course, is a little bit about, so much about Julian's passion for the National Health Service, and his passion for service to communities, and his belief that the research that should be done in general practice and family medicine should be done in the place we work, which is our communities and our practices. And there really was no strong research tradition at that point. This was 1979 in America. I mean, we were kind of getting started and doing some very, cursory kinds of studies, and a few things that were really good studies, but to watch what he was doing and how he was doing it was just, amazing. So, I spent 9 months practicing, visiting people like Graham Watt up in Glasgow, and seeing John Horter in London. And, he sent me around to all the people he knew. And I just had a wonderful time. And it's changed me because I still quote Julian's, that article. I can almost recite it from memory, that, the 3 things that we're supposed to be doing in academic general practice is teaching about uncertainty, how to help physicians make decisions with incomplete information, which is still one of the strong things that general practice has to do and family medicine has to do. The second is to change medicine at the level of the communities in which we work. So, Julian was a big believer, even though I read NHS stuff all the time, he was a big believer in changing Glencorrog for the better, which he did. And the third thing he taught, which is germane now, and he wrote about rather, is that we have to teach disciplined anger, and anger not at people, but at the things that impede the care of patients that we know they should be having. And that is, that's the source of a lot of the moral distress that's going on in medicine, all in primary care and family medicine, GPs all over the world. Is a sense of our inability, our anger is at systems that will not change to meet our patients' needs. And so, as Julian would always advise us, let's get together, let's go arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, and make the changes. And so that's been inspiring me my whole life. And that's 45 years ago. So it's been a while.
Julian was a tremendous activist and certainly a great advocate for the National Health Service and for community practice. But it's interesting to me that you picked out that article on education that inspired you, because I know that you have fairly strong views on residency education at the moment, and you feel it needs radical reform.
Yes. My first identity is that I'm a family doctor. My second is I'm a teacher, and I kind of put those close together. And one of the things you see, and I've seen certainly over my life, and you have too, is that much of the education, residency education, which is the postgraduate education in the US, hasn't changed much in 50 years. Education is a very conservative field. I keep telling people, they say, oh, professors and educators are all very progressive. I said, no, they're not. They maybe vote that way, but they don't act that way. And so one of the problems is when you say to people, we have to blow up this whole thing and kind of start all over again, it terrifies them instead of excites them, because people in education are more comfortable with being comfortable. They work very hard, and I admire everything about them, and they're really kind of thoughtful and brilliant inside of a box. But I don't know enough about actually what general practice education is these days in UK. But I suspect if you look at it and what it was like when you trained and what it is now, probably not a lot of difference. I mean, maybe there is, but my sense is that we all are getting stuck. And the way you start something out and they say, we're going to change this with time, and we're going to be flexible, and we're going to be thinking about new things, that gets lost because, you're so concentrated on making sure the box gets checked, and there's so much supervision and so much oversight and all this kind of stuff. And so what I'm trying to say, and we're all, as a group of us that are right about this, is education needs to start in communities, not hospitals, that you negotiate with hospitals, to work with hospitals and work in hospitals. But the focus has to be in communities, not in hospitals. And in the States, all the money from the federal government and all of the other things that come to graduate medical education come to hospitals. And what we're talking about is actually for family medicine, having us located primarily in communities and having a relationship with lots of different agencies and institutions and schools and public health and work sites and hospitals. But that the trending is, except for usually in rural areas, most family doctors in this country are not even doing hospital care. And if you're not doing hospital care, why spend 2/3 of your training in a hospital? And it's probably going to happen after I'm gone. But I think the main thing is if we can light a fire underneath a lot of younger people saying, you got to take responsibility for the future of this discipline. And it's not, it's not what it is now. It's what you can imagine or you can think. And there's a lot of young people who have wonderful ideas and terrific energy. And I'm hopeful, but it's been very hard to try and get people to think differently.
You're clearly inciting a group of covert radicals, maybe covert senior radicals.
I hope so.
One of the things I'm also interested in is how you feel that, what's the role for senior academics? You described yourself as the faculty whisperer. So Tell me a little bit about how you see the role for senior academics now.
It's a great question, Donald, because, there's 200 of us around the country who were the first cohort of people in family medicine in 1971. And, I never even heard the word retirement or senior or anything like that, because the people who started family medicine were in their 30s and 40s, so they weren't old either. But as I got older and I started realizing that a lot of the people I really respected and admired, and they really couldn't figure out what to do next after they were out of leadership. leadership was kind of the crowning jewel of their careers. And I think it's, as one of my teachers said, it's a job you do, it's not who you are. And so when I got out of a leadership role in a department and a couple other places, what I realized is that what I enjoyed the most was spending time with fellows, young faculty members, and a lot of my colleagues who were getting to the point of saying, I'm thinking about transitioning out of leadership and I don't know what to do next, or they couldn't figure out what to do next, or they were scared of what to do next. And so what I started doing was spending time as physically as much as I could, and then certainly on the phone and other ways with young people, take them out for a coffee and say, so Donald, how are you? What's going on in your life? I had no power. I had no authority, but I had a lot of experience. And so what was interesting is some of my colleagues, when I said, this is what I'm doing a lot, they said, well, don't they turn you down sometimes? And I said, no, in 10 years, no one's ever said no. And now that I'm retired, I say, they got to buy the breakfast. So, it's one of those things where I feel what I'm doing is I'm using the skills that I have and the experience that I have in a way, as long as you listen and not tell, which is what I'm doing. And so it's been a wonderful time of my life. I mean, I've enjoyed it more than almost any time I've ever remembered. And so one of the things that, so a colleague of mine who's a coach, they have a lot of coaching going on in the world these days, and he's an executive coach. And he gave me his card, and he said, in the bottom it said, executive whisperer. And so I thought, that's what I'm doing. So, I call myself, I don't call myself, but I mean, I haven't gotten a card yet that says, faculty whisperer, but clearly. And so when I moved back to the Midwest from being out West for a number of years, I introduced myself to all the programs around here, introduced myself to the chairs, most of whom I know, and said, how could I be helpful? And they said, well, I'm not sure. And I said, how about if I just have a coffee with some of your senior faculty or talk with some of your whatever? And they said, oh, that would be wonderful. So, I'm having a lot of coffees and enjoying it very, very much. I've never been, as you can imagine, a terribly enthusiastic institutional player. I'm better off working from the outside, frankly. I mean, again, I don't model myself after Julian, but Julian wrote these unbelievable things. He wrote about peripheries of excellence, which is one of my favorite phrases of his. And the idea that, from the community coming back into academics, I can talk with folks because I have enough experience and they know me and from what I've done and stuff, that I think I can be helpful. So that's a long explanation, but it's been just a wonderful experience. And senior people all over the world can do that. I had lots of senior teachers and things like that, but nobody ever called me up and said, let's talk about how you're doing. A safe place to talk about how your career is going, how you are, things like that.
What you're describing is fascinating because it's a whole new cohort, a whole new third age, let's say, of family medicine academics. Now, I was going to ask you another question, but I think I probably know the answer. And that is, when you meet all the junior faculty and when you meet the academic faculty, are you hopeful for the future?
When I meet the individuals, I am. I think what it comes down to is, I'm on a phone call every week with a really wonderful and distinguished group of people who we've been friends for our whole lives, and we can start bemoaning many of the things that are happening. A lot of things that are happening are terribly problematic, but each of us can tell a story of a person, usually a younger person, sometimes not, who has just been inspiring and has all the right ideas and is trying really hard and is resilient and all those things. So when I spend time with people one-on-one, what I see is the best in people. I see their hopes and I see their dreams, and my job is to say, go get them, go give it a try. And I'm happy to help you in whatever way I can. But mostly what I want to say is go try it, and convince people that you want to try something new. So the optimism I have comes from individuals. And Gail Stevens wrote 40 years ago that biggest challenge for family medicine going forward was not going to be the other fields of medicine. It was going to be ourselves. And I think that's certainly something that has appeared to be true on an institutional level these days.
John, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Long may you remain a radical activist whisperer. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Donald.